Today's discussion delves into a Supreme Court case that sparked quite a debate, Stanley v. City of Sanford, Florida. It centers around the Americans with Disabilities Act and its application to retiree benefits. A seemingly straightforward issue, but the court's decision has created quite a stir.
Indeed. The case highlights a crucial intersection between employment law, disability rights, and the interpretation of statutory language. The nuances are significant, and the implications extend far beyond this single case.
The core question is whether the ADA protects retirees from disability-based discrimination in their post-retirement benefits. What's your initial take on the court's approach?
The court's interpretation hinges heavily on a very specific reading of the qualified individual definition within the ADA. They focus on the present tense verbs, arguing it only applies to those currently holding or seeking employment.
So the court essentially says that because the alleged discrimination occurred after retirement, the plaintiff wasn't a qualified individual under Title I of the ADA. This seems to limit the scope of the act considerably. Let's recap the facts of the Stanley case. Karen Stanley, a firefighter, retired due to disability in 2018. The city of Sanford had changed its health insurance policy in 2003, reducing coverage for disability retirees to 24 months.
Exactly. The change in policy is the crux of the matter. Stanley argued this change discriminated against her based on her disability. The lower courts agreed with the city's argument that the ADA didn't apply post-retirement.
So the Supreme Court had to decide whether the ADA's anti-discrimination provision extends to retirees who no longer hold or seek employment. A significant question with broad implications. The court's majority opinion focuses heavily on the statutory language. They emphasize the present tense verbs holds and desires in the definition of qualified individual.
Yes, the court argues that the use of present tense verbs indicates that the ADA protects only those currently employed or actively seeking employment. This is a very literal interpretation of the statute.
But Stanley and the dissent argued that this interpretation renders parts of the statute redundant. They pointed to other sections that seem to suggest broader protection.
Precisely. The dissent argued that the court's interpretation ignores the broader purpose of the ADA to eliminate disability-based discrimination. They felt the court's focus on the specific wording overshadowed the act's overall intent.
The dissent also proposed an alternative interpretation, suggesting the qualified individual requirement is conditional only applicable if the plaintiff holds or seeks a job.
This interpretation would essentially make every retiree automatically qualified if they don't hold or seek a job, removing the qualification as a barrier to a claim. The court rejected this as convoluted.
The court also referenced precedent, particularly Cleveland v. Policy Management Systems Corporation, which seemed to suggest that inability to work could negate an ADA claim.
Yes, but the dissent argued that Cleveland dealt with a different situation, a plaintiff claiming inability to work, not a retiree claiming discrimination in post-employment benefits. The contexts are distinct.
Justice Jackson's dissenting opinions strongly criticized the majority's approach, arguing it overlooked the facts and the ADA's overall purpose.
The dissent highlighted the counterintuitive result. A retiree who earned benefits while employed is denied protection if the discrimination occurs after retirement. This, the dissent argued, directly contradicts the ADA's aim.
The dissent also pointed out that the discrimination in Stanley's case arguably occurred while she was still employed before her retirement. This complicates the majority's narrow focus on post-retirement discrimination.
Exactly. The dissent argued that the timing of the lawsuit shouldn't be the sole determinant of whether a claim is valid. The discriminatory act, they argued, occurred during her employment when she was a qualified individual.
Several conferring opinions also weighed in, adding further complexity to the court's decision. Justice Thomas, for example, expressed concern about the shifting arguments presented by the plaintiff.
Justice Thomas's concurrence highlighted the issue of litigants changing their arguments after certiorari is granted, a practice he viewed as problematic. He felt the court shouldn't address issues not fully developed in the lower courts.
Justice Sotomayor concurred in part and dissented in part, agreeing with the dissent's view that titleized protections shouldn't cease upon retirement.
Justice Sotomayor's concurrence acknowledged the majority's error, but agreed with the procedural aspect of the majority's decision, noting that the plaintiff hadn't properly preserved the argument about discrimination during employment in the lower courts.
This case has significant implications for employers and employees alike. It raises questions about the scope of ADA protection and the interpretation of statutory language.
Absolutely. The decision could affect how employers design and implement retirement benefit plans, particularly for employers with disabilities. It also raises questions about the balance between textualism and the broader purpose of legislation.
The court's emphasis on textualism, while seemingly straightforward, can lead to unintended consequences, potentially undermining the very purpose of the ADA.
The case highlights the ongoing tension between strict textual interpretation and the need to consider the broader context and purpose of legislation. Finding the right balance is crucial for ensuring fair and effective application of the law.
The court's interpretation of the qualified individual definition is central to its decision. How do you see this impacting future cases?
The court's narrow interpretation could significantly limit the number of successful ADA claims related to retirement benefits. Future plaintiffs will need to demonstrate they were qualified at the precise moment the alleged discrimination occurred.
This could create a high bar for proving discrimination, particularly in cases involving gradual policy changes or delayed effects of disability.
Precisely. The court's focus on the precise moment of discrimination could make it difficult for plaintiffs to establish a causal link between their disability and the alleged discriminatory action.
The dissent emphasized the importance of considering legislative intent when interpreting statutes. How crucial is this in cases like Stanley?
Legislative intent is crucial in cases where the statutory language is ambiguous or susceptible to multiple interpretations. Ignoring the purpose of the ADA risks undermining its effectiveness in protecting individuals with disabilities.
The majority's focus on the literal wording, while seemingly objective, could inadvertently contradict the ADA's broader goal of eliminating disability discrimination.
The tension between textualism and purposivism is a recurring theme in statutory interpretation. This case highlights the potential pitfalls of prioritizing strict textualism over the overall purpose of the legislation.
What are the potential avenues for future litigation stemming from this decision? Could Congress act to clarify the law?
Future litigation will likely focus on challenging the court's narrow interpretation of the qualified individual definition. Plaintiffs may attempt to argue that the discrimination occurred during their employment, even if the adverse effects are felt later.
Congress could certainly amend the ADA to clarify its application to post-retirement benefits. This would provide a more definitive answer and potentially avoid future litigation.
Legislative action would offer a clearer framework for resolving these types of disputes. It could explicitly address the issue of post-retirement benefits and ensure consistent application of the ADA across different jurisdictions.
The case underscores the importance of considering the context in which statutes are enacted and interpreted. How does this apply to the ADA?
The ADA was enacted to address systemic discrimination against individuals with disabilities. Interpreting the statute narrowly, as the majority did, risks undermining its effectiveness in achieving its intended purpose.
The court's decision, while seemingly based on a straightforward reading of the text, fails to fully consider the historical context and the broader societal goals of the ADA.
The case highlights the need for a holistic approach to statutory interpretation, one that considers not only the literal wording, but also the context, purpose, and potential consequences of the interpretation.
What are the practical implications of this decision for employers? How might they adapt their retirement benefit plans?
Employers may need to review their retirement benefit plans to ensure they comply with the court's interpretation of the ADA. This could involve making changes to benefit structures or providing additional accommodations.
The decision could lead to increased litigation and uncertainty for employers, particularly those with large numbers of employees with disabilities.
Employers may need to seek legal counsel to ensure their plans are compliant and to understand the potential risks associated with disability-based discrimination in retirement benefits.
In conclusion, the Stanley case highlights the complexities of statutory interpretation and the ongoing debate between textualism and purposivism. The court's decision has significant implications for disability rights and employment law.
The case underscores the need for a nuanced approach that balances the literal wording of the statute with its broader purpose and the potential consequences of its interpretation. The decision leaves room for future litigation and potential legislative action to clarify the law.
That was a great discussion. Thank you for your insights. This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more.